Well, good evening, and thank you for having us to present tonight. I'm happy to be here. I'm Maria Smith. I'm the coordinator for outreach and education for Achieva Family Trust. And tonight I'm going to be talking with you about sort of a basic overview about considerations that you should consider when you're thinking about planning for a family member with a disability. And again, this is, as I was saying to Katie, this is really a very broad overview of your considerations. And uh, a lot of times, when I do these presentations, we cover a lot of ground and a lot of topics. And I always tell families that this information, I mean, for example, we're going to briefly talk a little bit about government benefits. And frankly, that could be in itself, a 2-hour presentation. And for many of you, again, you can go back and review this, but this presentation, but also on our website, Achieva Family Trust .org or .info. I'm sorry. We have a lot of it is .org. My apology. We have a lot of information on that website, particularly archived webinars that will cover more extensively some of the topics that I'll go over tonight. For example, there's a whole seminar on Social Security and on Medicaid, employment. I mean, there's just a lot of specific topics related to individuals with disabilities. So I'd encourage you to look at our website. And as I say, if you want to go back and review that information and get more information, that's a good place to go. So with that, and so as I say, tonight it's a broad overview. We have about an hour, and I did have questions that were submitted, and hopefully I'll cover most of those questions that were submitted in the presentation. But if not, we'll still take questions at the end. So Katie, if you want to share the slides, and I'll kind of go through the information and kind of start a discussion. Okay, there we go. So there we go. So yes, so I'm with the Achieva Family Trust, and we are part of the Achieva family. Next slide. Okay, there we go. So a little bit about Achieva, the Family Trust. We are part of Achieva, which was formerly ARC Allegheny. Many of you might know about the ARCs. There's, it's a national organization. We're still part of that national organization, but it was a grassroots organization that was started by parents in the 50s out of concern for their kids with disabilities. And Achieva, we're again a division of Achieva, but it is one of the largest providers of services to people with disabilities in southwestern Pennsylvania. And I should add, the Family Trust, as our organization, actually serves all of Pennsylvania, and actually we have some beneficiaries in other states as well. But Achieva's services are through the lifespan. They're everywhere from early intervention, residential supports, employment. So it's a whole range. We always say kind of like birth to death, So that we are part of that organization, which is really means that Achieva Family Trust has access to a number of resources and networks within the disability community. Next slide. Achieva Family Trust, the division that I work in, which, by the way, it's interesting. It says it was established in 1998. I've been there actually since 1999. I was one of the first 2 staff that were hired to get the trust up and running. Interestingly enough, the Family Trust was established in 1998, but it was done in response to some changes to Social Security legislation in 1993 that created one of the trusts, actually 2 of the trusts that I'll talk about tonight. One of them is a pooled trust, and the pooled trust, in order to administer a pooled trust, it's a type of special needs trust, you had to be a nonprofit. And Achieva Family Trust was the first nonprofit in Pennsylvania that actually stepped forward to recognize the benefit of providing special needs trusts for people with disabilities. And when we talk about, so you'll see why. I mean, it's all about the use of special needs trust and in order to enrich the quality of life for people with disabilities. So offering these trusts and the idea of providing this to people with disabilities was really seen at the time by our board as part of our mission, which was then ARC Allegheny. Um, right now, though, and again, it's amazing. I've seen the growth of the trust. I mean, I think I was there when we wrote the first checks for disbursements, but now we are a corporate trustee for all three types of special needs trust, which again, I'll cover a little bit about them. And we provide services across all disabilities. So it's not just limited to people with intellectual disabilities. It's physical, it's mental health, it's head injury. It's a wide range. So the and also, as I said, we provide it across the state of Pennsylvania and in some other states. Another important thing, though, that we provide is we do a lot of no-cost consultation and resources, providing resources for individuals with disabilities and their families to assist in future planning. All of our services that we provide, and again, I'll talk a little bit about our outreach and education, all of that is provided at no cost. Families can call us. We get lots of calls about, questions, benefits, services. And, we also meet individually with families and go over their individual situation to give some advice about what might be needed in their specific situations when they're thinking about future planning. And currently, we do have over 2,500 beneficiaries in Pennsylvania, 12 other states, and about 175 million in assets. And again, keep in mind, all of those assets are the individuals' funds that we use again and are trusted with to disperse for their quality of life. Next. So the future planning project, part of this outreach effort that we have been involved in, actually it's been since 2014 to now, and it really came about back in 2012. The United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania did a survey of caregivers that to look at whether they had future plans in place for their family members when they could no longer care for them. Big concern, what is going to happen to my child if I can no longer care for them. And United Way, there was an incident that prompted them to do a survey of caregivers, and it showed that fewer than half of the respondents that they surveyed had wills or any plans in place for their dependents when they were no longer able to provide care. I have to also say this, though. I mean, I look at the survey results and these survey results, and I dare to say that there are probably a lot of parents in general that if you surveyed them that may not have plans in place either in the event, that they need a guardian or whatever. And because I think it's just a very difficult area for some to think about. It's a hard question. Like what is going to happen to my family member? But as a result of that survey, the United Way did a request for proposals, and because we had been doing so much of that already in terms of outreach and meeting with families, we applied for it, and we did receive a grant, and we have received grant funds to this day from United Way and some other sources to continue this effort. And so part of what we do is education and outreach, this kind of a presentation. We do a lot of collaboration with legal professionals, and I'll talk a little bit more about the importance of the legal services, particularly when you're dealing with a situation where you need that expertise. But we do a lot of education, consultation with legal professionals. We do provide a list of professionals, legal attorneys in Pennsylvania that have this kind of expertise, and we make it available on our website. And if you call us, we'll send it to you, because having an attorney who has this kind of expertise is important. We also use the Pitt Law Clinic too, because we know that that legal services can be expensive, but we try to help in any way we can to get you to the right care. We also provide a free future planning guide on our website that again is available. We're working on it right now, and in order to make it so that you can fill it out online. It is a kind of a guide that families can use to pass information to a future caregiver about the particular needs and wants of their child. And again, we do a lot of referrals for future planning services. And, as I said, we talk to families and individuals, providers all the time about what's out there, what resources. Next slide. So when families come to us, again, some of the things that keep them up at night, that they tell us is, what would happen if I suddenly wasn't able to provide care for my family member? Where's my family member going to live? How will my family member function in the community without me? Who will look after their finances? And who will make sure my family's health care needs are met? And also a big question is, when should I start future planning? And I saw there was some questions that were raised previous to the webinar and we always tell families it's never too soon to start to think about future planning. We have families that come to us who have little kids, toddlers, small children, thinking about the future. And then we have older families who come to us who haven't done anything. And it's not too late for them either, as long as the parents are still alive and functioning, we say it's never too early or too late to start future planning. So some of the things that you should consider when you're thinking about, where do I start? How do I think about planning? And what are the things I need to consider when I'm doing my plan? And some of the important parts of this process are understanding what government benefits your family member is receiving now and may need in the future. And tonight I'll talk a little bit about the differences between benefits we describe as needs-based versus those that we talk about that are entitlement. And there's, depending on the benefits that your family member is receiving or may need to receive, it has some bearing on how you can plan for and leave funds to your child when you're no longer, when you want to pass money to them. As I say, the government benefits tonight we'll just cover very briefly, but we also find there's a lot of confusion out there about the differences, SSI, Supplemental Security Income versus SSDI. So we just want to give you a couple of slides that differentiate what are the differences, and also Medicaid and Medicare. The other thing that's very important to consider, your last will and testament. Everyone needs a will, and it's important, no matter what, that everyone needs a will to determine how you want your assets to be distributed upon your death. And so a will is important for everyone, but for families, parents who have kids with special needs, it's important to make sure that you have a will and you're thinking about, if I'm going to leave anything, any assets, any funds to my child with a disability, how can I do that and not interrupt their government benefits? And that's where the idea of the special needs trust, can be helpful to families, and also to individuals if they receive money in their name they weren't expecting. So again, I'll touch on those. Guardianship and power of attorney. Now, I'm not going to cover any of that tonight, because again, that in itself is a whole webinar, and we do have a webinar that was done by an attorney, Nora Gay, who does a great job of explaining the differences. And to the extent, I'll just tell you that most people that we encounter, most families, if your family member is able to, your family member with a disability is able to give consent to have someone help them to make decisions, and that can be in the healthcare and finances. A lot of times, a power of attorney can be utilized because guardianship.
Excuse me. Your volume like went way down. I don't know if like it got turned down or what. We can barely hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. Is that any better? Is that any better? Can you hear me now?
Not really.
Really? I wonder what. Let me move a little closer. Um,
I haven't had any change, so I don't know if it's specific to her.
yeah. Well, I'll try to speak up. Um, Again, the guardianship versus power of attorney. A guardianship is a legal process and can be costly. And again, if unless the person's really not able to make or communicate decisions, it's a process that you don't necessarily want to use unless you have to. But again, I won't be really going over much of that tonight. Something again to consider: the future planning tools. We talked about the personal planning guide, the future planning guide, and also ABLE accounts, which I will talk about tonight, because that is another wonderful option for individuals with disabilities and their families to save in such a way that it doesn't interrupt government benefits like Medicaid or SSI. Similar to a pooled trust or to a trust, but special needs trust, but there are some differences. And again, I'll review that. Okay, next slide. So I mentioned about government benefits. Why is this important? Well, it's important because distinguishing needs-based benefits such as SSI, Medicaid, and Medicaid waiver, which is really Medicaid for long-term care, as opposed to entitlements, is important because it has a bearing in terms of, once again, if you are planning to leave funds to your family member with a disability, you need to understand the rules and what can impact their benefits. And needs-based benefits, and it's important to know, are benefits that are based on a person's disability. They have to qualify according to the Social Security definition of disability, but they also need to qualify financially. And SSI and Medicaid will ask and assess a person's income. They're going to look at, what income does the person have coming in that is due to them personally. And then they're going to also look at the person's resources or assets. Do they have bank accounts, checking, savings? What about cash value of life insurance, savings bonds, retirement accounts? So anything that may be a resource or accessible to that person can count against them when they're applying for Supplemental Security Income and Medicaid. And again, the requirements for those benefits are fairly strict. In general, for SSI, you can't have more than $2,000 total in your name in order to qualify for SSI. And there are, again, certain income limits. Medicaid is the same. There are certain income and asset limits for Medicaid. And there are a number of different programs with Medicaid, so that some of the income and the asset limits are a little different. But in general, there are income and asset limits for Medicaid, so you have to be aware of them. And again, I'll have a slide on a couple of these things. And Medicaid waivers, again, for many people who have intellectual disabilities, autism, physical disabilities, who need home and community-based services for their care. That's where the Medicaid waiver services come into play. And they, again, for long-term care, do have income and asset limits in addition to disability requirements. So The needs-based benefits, though, are different than the entitlements. The entitlements we describe as Social Security disability, Social Security survivor benefits, and Medicare. And what does that mean, entitlements? It means that if you have a work history and you've paid in, or a parent has a work history, has paid into Social Security and becomes disabled or deceased, then as long as you've paid into the system, you are entitled to receive benefits if one of those incidents occur, disability or death. So again, I will touch on those, but the point is to distinguish the two, because again, a lot of families will call us and say, my family member's on Social Security, and you'll say, well, which, are they on SSI or SSD? And it's like, well, I'm not sure. So we have to then ask them to kind of go deeper. Let's look at the award letter and distinguish. Because again, if you're looking to provide for your family member upon your death, if you leave someone funds, for example, they're on SSI, you leave them above the $2,000 limit, you can disqualify them from their benefit. So let's look at a slide on SSI. Next slide. So SSI, Supplemental Security Income. Again, I mentioned the asset limit is $2,000, and they will look at, SSI generally does a 3-year, if you go to apply for SSI, they're going to want all of the information about the person's disability. And by the way, this includes, and we get lots of questions about kids that are turning 18, because keep in mind, before the age of 18, kids, in terms of qualifying for SSI, they do count family income and assets in order to see if that child, even if they're disabled, if they're eligible for any cash benefits, because that's what SSI is, cash benefits. And if the family income and assets are over a certain limit, they evaluate it, the child may not qualify for SSI cash. However, when they are reaching 18, then that child is able to apply for SSI cash on their own. And at that time, again, when they're applying, they have to show their disability. They have to be able to show medical and school records to prove disability. But at that time also, there will be what they call a 3-year look back of any bank accounts, anything that was in that child's name that might count against them for against that $2,000 limit. So I think someone asked if money was in a 529, whether that would count against the child, and that should not, because the ownership, I think, of the 529 is the parent. But anything that's in that child's name that could, so it's a 36-month look back. The extent of the coverage for SSI, you'll see this is the 2022 amount. The maximum you can get is $841 a month. Now, I think Pennsylvania still supplements about $22 a month. Not all states supplement, but PA does. And again, you'll see the cap for the benefit. One of the things about SSI, it does get reduced if the person receives in-kind services or cash or cash equivalents. So what's that mean? It means that if, and we see this a lot with kids who live with their families, if the family, when they look at the household expenses and they look at how the child can contribute to those household expenses, there are certain situations where they're going to say, oh, the family is providing additional support, for that child, and they reduce the maximum amount that the child gets because they assume that the parents are doing some support. And so frequently, unless the kid is living independently or in a residential program, a lot of times they're not going to get the maximum. And so again, it's pretty strict as far as SSI. There's usually a yearly redetermination of eligibility, and it's fairly strict in terms of income and assets. And again, that $2,000 limit hasn't changed for years. They're looking to try to increase it, but it's still $2,000. The one good thing about SSI, though, especially in the state of Pennsylvania, if you even get $1 of SSI, in Pennsylvania, you're automatically receiving Medicaid. And so Medicaid is attached to your SSI. One thing that I should also mention, and probably I'll maybe repeat it again with the Medicaid, because why don't you go to the next slide for Medicaid? Let's look at that. This is one of the things that if you have a child with a disability, you probably know that their Medicaid, they are getting Medicaid irregardless of the parent's income and asset. And that's really a result of what they call the loophole in Pennsylvania. We're one of the few states that does that. And so they don't count the income and assets for a child. Actually, it's supposed to be under 21. They don't count the parent income and asset. But what happens though is once that child is turning 18, usually the MA will ask you to go apply for SSI and get a determination whether that child qualifies for SSI. And then because again, it's based on the disability determination, and then hopefully the Medicaid can continue. And again, Medicaid is, I always say that the one thing about Medicaid, I mean, it's very comprehensive. There's lots of services, and particularly for people with disabilities, it's probably the one most important service that people receive or benefit is Medicaid. And if anything, people don't want to lose it's their Medicaid because it pays for so much of their care, medical, prescriptions, hospital services. But also importantly, if they need long-term care waiver services, for people that beyond school, for example, adults who, maybe a lot of physical disabilities who need in-home care, Medicaid helps them to get up, and Medicaid waiver and the in-home services help them to get up in the morning, be able to maybe go out and have a job and that sort of thing. So those services, as you know, long-term care services are very expensive. And we always say it's kind of like if you're very rich or you're very poor. They're really, to be able to afford in-home care is very expensive. So, but so Medicaid is probably, like I say, one of the most important. And I also mentioned earlier, Medicaid has a lot of different programs. I mean, there is a Medicaid program for medical assistance for workers with disabilities, people that want to work. There are higher income limits, higher assets. By the way, waiver services have higher income and asset limits too. But there's a variety of medical assistance services. And I would tell you that, we work with the PA Health Law Project, and they do a webinar that again is archived on our website that is really very comprehensive of the Medicaid program. And Aaron Gay is James Minor. They do a fantastic job of explaining all the different programs of Medicaid. So
I have a question. I'm getting feedback.
okay, and go ahead.
Now with me, I'm gonna get feedback. Shoot, hold on. I gotta turn on my mic. With disability, do you still have the $2,000 limit?
I was saying that there are a number of different programs that have higher income higher asset limits and also higher income limits. It depends on what program you're in or what program you need. So again, it's fairly complicated. The 2,000 is just the general, for straight Medicaid, it's the $2,000 limit.
Because I work, and now with them when they raise the disability income for the year, they put me over the asset limit, and now I'm worried about having to pay for my Medicare premium. And is there a mod? Because I turned my income in and everything, and now I'm worried that I'm gonna end up shut off. Like, what happens now?
Yeah. So if you want to give at the end of these slides, my contact number is on that last slide. You can give me a call because we can put you in touch with the PA Health Law Project, and they can actually work with you in your individual situation and tell you what you're entitled to. Because again,
Okay,
they'll need to know. But please, feel free, give me a call and I'll be happy to connect you. Okay?
because we're trying to figure out what's gonna happen, like, as far as, am I gonna start paying for my Medicare premium? Am I
Yes.
gonna be put,
I,
am I
I
gonna lose insurance and start having to pay for
yeah,
private insurance?
I get it. And again, totally understand the concern. And again, it's very individual, so that's why I'm saying if you can call me, I'm happy to put you in touch with the experts who can really walk you through what you might be entitled to. Um,
Okay,
so and by the way, we're trying to kind of hold off questions to the end because there's a lot to get through, and I apologize, but
okay, I'm sorry.
no worries at all. So let's go to the next slide. So Social Security disability, I mentioned earlier that that is an entitlement. And again, what does that mean? If you have a work history, you have paid in so many quarters um, to Social Security, and you become disabled, then you can apply for disability benefits. And the income or the benefits are based on what your income history was while you were working. Again, the disability that, there's a specific determination of a definition of disability. And I know it can take quite some time, especially during COVID. I know people have called us and talked to us about how long it's taking to get these disability determinations. Um, but again, it is a process of reviewing medical records, et cetera, et cetera. And as I say, you have to be able to show that over the last 10 years, you've had so many quarters of work history. We talk about substantial gainful employment. Their definition, Social Security generally is looking at a condition that is ongoing, somebody who is permanently disabled that is not able to work, or the condition can result in death. But having said that, we know people can work and be on disability. It's just that there are certain income limits that you cannot earn over in a month to keep your eligibility. And once again, Social Security has a number of different programs for people who are working to help them to try to keep their Social Security. But it is all based on work history. Um, and of course, for people that are parents, if you are working let's say a parent dies, then if you have minor children, they may be eligible for Social Security um, based on survivor benefits. But we also, and I think it's the next slide. Uh, you want to go to the next slide? It's also important to know a lot. You know what? If you could all mute, if you could mute, because I'm getting an echo. Thank you. Um, the other thing that we want
Sorry
to,
about
well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure why we're getting that, but um, the other important thing is to know about for parents is there is a benefit that if a child was disabled before the age of 22 and a parent um, is deceased, or a parent becomes disabled, or they retire, that child might be, and it can be an adult child, may be eligible for Social Security disability benefits based on the parent's work history. And that those benefits are entitled to that child throughout their life unless they get married or start to work full time. But they call it the DAC benefits, a disabled adult child benefit. And again, I think Social Security has gotten fairly good recently asking questions about, of families in terms of if you have a child with a disability. But but if not, I mean, it's something to be aware of if you're applying for Social Security as a parent and you have a child. And again, it's all based on earnings, what you earned during your work time. But it's an important benefit to know about. And also the child in some cases can also continue their medical assistance even if the Social Security from the parent is higher than the income limits. And there's certain rules about that, but it's a good thing to know about. So Social Security, by the way, when you apply for Social Security disability benefits, nobody's going to ask you what's in your bank account or how much you have in how much other income, unless it's work income. They're not going to ask you about your investments or your retirement savings or anything, because the entitlement is based on, did you have a work history and did you pay into the system? So that's a big difference, the huge difference between the Social Security disability and SSI. You want to go to the next slide? Um, so Social Security disability is tied to Medicare. We all always think about Medicare for people over 65. However, Medicare is also an entitlement for people who have been on disability after 2 years of being on disability. Um, then you automatically qualify for Medicare. And again, it's tied to the Social Security disability benefit. Again, Medicare is certainly, a good coverage for medical needs. However, I think most of you know there it is limited in terms of limited. It's about 80%, covers about 80% of your healthcare costs, and so for most people, and many people we see who are on disability, they still need, and this goes for seniors too, need some kind of a supplement, to make up for that 20% that Medicare doesn't provide. For many people on disability, that supplement is Medicaid. So if you hear the term dual eligible, which by the way, we're going to be doing a speaker series at the end of March on this topic, and I'm going to get those dates to, I think it's March 30th, but I'll get those dates to Katie. But the whole idea of the dual eligible, Medicaid or Medicare being first, the first payer, and then Medicaid picking up for anything that is not covered by Medicare. So again, these are important benefits. The healthcare benefits of everything that we're talking about are really the benefits that people want to protect. But Medicare is not affected by income or assets. It's tied to Social Security disability. It's an entitlement. So let's go to the next slide. So, I mentioned leaving any assets directly to an individual with a disability can disqualify them from receiving their government benefits. So if you are doing your will and you got 3 kids and one of the children is disabled and you want to leave 3 kids, equally, the equal amounts, a lot of families want to divide things equally. For that child with a disability, if you're thinking of leaving them anything over $2,000 and they're on SSI or Medicaid, it can affect their benefits and disqualify them. So sometimes families, are told by, and this is historically, I think, these are the kinds of things family have been told in the past. Just disinherit your child, don't leave them anything. Just leave it to another child without a disability, and they'll hold the money and distribute it according to the other child's needs. And you can do that. That's perfectly legal, but it does put those assets at risk in the sense of that child that's not disabled. There's always a possibility that they could be subject to bankruptcy or divorce, or they could die. And then those assets are really not preserved for the child with the disability. They're really a part of the estate of the non-disabled child. So it's a risk to disinherit. You want to go to the next slide, please? sometimes also we have a, people we'll have someone who'll say, well, I'm receiving funds from Aunt Harriet who left me, $20,000. I'm on Medicaid or SSI, and if I take the money, then I'm going to be disqualified from my benefits. And so they'll say, well, I'll just give it away. I'll put it in someone else's name. I'll give it to my parent or whatever. And we tell them, that is not a wise thing to do, because if you're applying for Medicaid or SSI or you're on it, they will consider that asset a prohibited transfer. Like it's like you gave money away without any fair market value, and they can reduce your benefits or cut them off, actually. So it's important to know that asset transfers can be problematic if you're on those benefits that count. So when we talk about the importance of special needs trusts, that's kind of where special needs trusts and ABLE accounts come into play, because transfers to supplemental needs trust may be exempt from that look back period that we talked about, for SSI being 36 months and Medicaid being 60 months. So transfers, if you were taking that 20,000 and putting it in for example, a pooled trust, which I'll talk about, then that that is permitted. The special needs trusts are permitted. So go on to the next. So again, I mentioned if you're on disability, SSI, income and assets. And so what are the options to protect your benefits? So we'll talk about briefly the three types of special needs trusts and why they might be used: third party, pooled, and payback trust. And we have a couple of slides on the ABLE accounts too. And now we do not administer the ABLE accounts. They're actually administered through the Pennsylvania Department of Treasury. And on the slide, that's their website, but there's also an 800 number that we'll give you on the slide. But those are directly administered by the state. But they're a wonderful option, another savings option with some limitations that do allow people with disabilities to save funds in their name and not have it count against them for the purposes of government benefits. I'm going to go to the next. So again, this just reminds you about the last will and testament that we always say when you're getting to, do your will and thinking about special needs planning. It's really important to go to an attorney who knows what they're doing and how to properly draft these documents, because because again, particularly in a trust that doesn't get funded until you're passed, you want to make sure that they're done right. So, and again, just to reiterate, dying without a will, your assets will be distributed according to what the state laws are, and you may not want that. You want to be, you want to be able to decide who's going to get your assets upon your death. And okay, next slide. So, let's talk a little bit about special needs trusts. What are they, and why are they used? And as I said earlier, the whole idea, government benefits are wonderful, and people with disabilities, they are vital to their well-being. But government benefits are meant to provide the basics: housing, food, medical care. And, the whole idea of a special needs trust is it's to be able to provide resources for the person to live and supplement their quality of life, to pay for things maybe the government doesn't pay for, extra care, things that again, you may not be able to afford out of your Social Security or SSI, but that make life make life pleasurable, and a quality of life. Transportation, clothing, things that are again above and beyond, and medical care too, second opinions, communication devices, things that maybe Medicaid will not pay for. But it's meant to provide supplemental care. It's for the sole benefit of the beneficiary. Those trusts that are established or are dedicated to the needs of that individual. And again, it's used to supplement again, things like clothing, vacation, medical needs, transportation, recreation, entertainment. And when we think about people with disabilities in the community, the ability to have those resources to do some of those things that help them to become included in their community, like recreation, being out, going on vacation. Um, those are things that I think, once again, it helps that person to be empowered to do certain things that, like everyone else that is in the community. We do say that, for a special needs trust, you have to be careful about not using it. And it says cannot be used for housing, food, and utilities and cash. But that's really specifically with people with SSI, because if a trust provides for the person's rent or housing, it can reduce their SSI. Now, I got to tell you, sometimes we do it because they live in Philadelphia and the rent prices there are ridiculous, and we may need to supplement, and we do it, and it's planful, but generally, that's how it's described, that you try to avoid using it for the basics. Home purchases can be and accessibility renovations. We do pay for cars out of the trust. Again, if it's for the person, those things can be provided for through a special needs trust. Next slide. So the three types of special needs trusts: the common law, third party, the payback, and the pooled. Now, the payback and the pooled were those two were established through federal law, through Social Security legislation. The third party is the one that is established through case law, and it's the one that most families are going to use for estate planning. And you'll see why when I talk a little more about them. What is a trustee? A trustee is can be a individual trustee, or it can be a corporate trustee. The family trust is a corporate trustee. We're just like a bank, although we're, again, a nonprofit, but a corporate trustee is an organization, but it can be an individual. It can be more than one individual that's a trustee for a trust, except for the pooled trust. And the trustee's role, we always say this, they're not a guardian, they're not a rep payee, and they're not an executor of your will. The trustee's only role is to administer the funds that are within the trust, so that when that trust is funded, and upon your death, or when the trustee then takes on the role of administering those funds, investing those funds, paying the taxes, doing everything that they need to be to make sure that those funds are being used for the person. But if the person dies, then the role of the trustee is done. And depending on the type of trust you have, the funds can go according to what the trust dictates. But again, it depends on the type of trust. Anything that's in those trusts are not considered available and are not counted against the person for eligibility standards. And by the way, the amount in the trust can be quite high. There's no real cap on those funds. We have some personal injury settlement, trusts that were established from personal injury, where you have little kids and they're they're in the millions, and they have a special needs trust to provide for that child during their lifetime. So it's not there's not a cap on it. But it does, again, that special needs trust, the benefit is allows them to have above the $2,000 or the $8,000 waiver limit for their benefit, as long as it's in that trust and drafted properly. Next slide. So I mentioned the third party trust. This is the one that if you are a family member, you're going to want to use. And what it is, it's a type of trust that's used for the funds of family or friends, a parent, grandparent, friend of the family, an uncle, or anyone except the person with a disability. Funds of anyone else but the person with a disability, they can create a special needs trust for the person with a disability, who we call the beneficiary then. They're the beneficiary of that trust. And the third party trust, any money and again, these are generally created by families as part of their estate plan, and they get funded usually upon the death of the parent or maybe the death of both parents. And although there are certain circumstances where they're done during the parent's lifetime, but generally they're done with, upon the death. They're called testamentary trusts. Um, Again, any money that goes into that trust, and it's usually the way it happens is the parent will say, I'm leaving funds to my 3 kids. 2 kids, John and Joe, will get the money outright. My child with the disability, it will go into the special needs trust for Josephine as established by my will. So it's actually described specifically within the will that the funds for the child with the special for that is disabled will go directly into the trust. Important thing about that too, and if you go to an attorney who would be helping you with this, he'll also or she will advise you that you need to consider things like your retirement accounts or insurance benefits where the child with a disability is named, because if they're a beneficiary of those accounts, it actually needs to be the trust, the beneficiary needs to be changed to the trust. So those are the kinds of things that they'll talk to you about. But everything, you want to direct everything to the trust for your child with the special needs so that you protect those funds, because again, the funds that go in are not counted against them. The funds in a third-party trust, frankly, are pretty flexible in terms of how they're used. And the remaining funds, this is really key to why you want to use this type of trust. The key is that when the parent dies, you get, or I'm sorry, the beneficiary dies, the child with a disability, then funds can go to other family members. So you get to say, if you wrote the trust, where if you have other kids, you have grandkids, wherever you want it to go, can go to a charity, wherever you want it to go, you are permitted. So there's no payback to the state or medical assistance, because you'll see with the other 2 types of trusts, there are limitations on where the money can go. The other important thing about this trust, no age limit. We have parents in their 90s who have kids in their 60s, and if they're over 65, you'll see with the other 2 types of trusts, 65 is the age limit to create them, but there's no age limit for someone who has a trust, a third-party trust, if the parent dies. And let's say they're 68 or 70 years old, that trust is still valid. So third-party trusts, that's what you want to use. We have information on our website about the third-party trust. We give lawyers language, to use to create the trust, to make sure it's written properly, because the state will review this trust if your child's on any benefits like, Medicaid or SSI. It's full disclosure of these trusts, so they have to be written properly to not count. So next slide. Yes. So let's say the person I mentioned about someone receiving money in their name that maybe they didn't expect, and so the money is due to them. And so in that case, the type of trust that you have to consider is something called a self-funded trust. It's the person's money. And so in that case, and this payback trust, which we mentioned, again, only to let you know that those are available, but they're really, we see the payback trusts in fairly large settlements, personal injury, malpractice, where you have lots of money and the person's very disabled. Maybe it's a younger person. Over the course of their life, they're going to need lots of care. The payback trust can be used. Again, it's established by the individual with a disability, their parent, grandparent, legal guardian, or the court. And they have to be disabled, but they have to be under 65 when it's established. and it can be an individual or a corporate trustee. But this trust has to be drafted by an attorney, which, by the way, the third party trust also has to be drafted by an attorney. But also, it has to be approved by the Department of Human Services before the person is eligible for benefits. Again, it's used just like the third party trust during the person's lifetime for the beneficiary, but upon the beneficiary's death, then the Department of Human Services presents a bill for any services that were provided during the person's lifetime. So the Medicaid benefits, it depends on the situation. If a very large trust, the child dies, young, there might be money left over. Once medical assistance is paid back, then it can be directed to family. But a lot of times, once the state provides their bill, there's no money left for anyone else to get any. But it's an available resource, so we let people know about it. And it is used by personal injury attorneys. And again, this is, there are upfront costs that you have to pay to draft the trust. And so there are costs involved in establishing this trust. So let's talk about the pooled trust. This is the last one. And I mentioned, we were created to offer a pooled trust to people with disabilities. And the pooled trust, again, it is also considered a self-funded trust, although it also can include money from other sources, like parents can contribute to it, grandparents. But it is a type of trust that, again, a person has to also be disabled. And again, the individual should be under the age of 65. Now, the federal law doesn't require that, but the problem is medical assistance, MA in Pennsylvania, it's a disallow. If anything over $500 in a pooled trust, if you're over 65, can reduce benefits. So, but the requirement of this pooled trust is that it has to be established by a nonprofit organization, which is why the family trust was created. The good thing about a pooled trust, and I didn't mention one of the things that was absolutely a principle of our board from way back. Not only that did we offer the trusts for people of all disabilities, but the other important principle was that it be offered to low and moderate income people, so that the trust could be accessible. Because when we think of trust, a lot of times we think about banks, and indeed, banks can have a very high minimum in terms of establishing a trust with a bank. But the whole idea was that the family trust was established to offer trusts for anyone who needed it, who had a disability. So we'll establish a trust for as low as $500. And believe me, we've done it for less than $500 in some circumstances. But the pooled trust has been a really great option for folks that maybe don't have a whole lot of money in terms of, maybe they hit the lottery or they had a back payment from Social Security, but they want to be able to protect, those funds. And rather than going to an attorney and drafting a payback trust, what they can do is establish a pooled trust. And all that it requires is filling out something called a joinder agreement, because our master trust that governs all of the trusts have already been approved by Social Security and medical assistance. And the joinder agreement, likewise, is like an application to create a trust. And between a joinder and a check, again, that's all we need to establish a trust. And it can be done fairly quickly, because we've had people that have, gotten money within a month, because again, in certain situations, you have till the end of the month to spend down funds, otherwise lose your benefits. So we've worked with people to, in some cases, to establish a pooled trust quickly to protect those assets so that they could keep their benefits. But in a pooled trust, and this goes for any pooled trusts that are out there, the funds are pooled for investment, but accounted for individually. And we use investors, a PNC and Capital Group, and we use them for all of the trust accounts that we have, but with some exceptions. But the whole idea is there's value in pooling the assets in terms of the investments to try to gain, the power of pooling those investments for the purposes of earning funds on those investments. Um, the one big change, or the one big difference though with the pooled trust, and again, this might be why a family might not want to use it as part of their estate, although some people have, at the beneficiary's death, uh, remaining funds stay with the trust. Now, the federal law says that according to any money that is not paid back to the state can be retained by the trust for charitable purposes. And in the case of the family trust, we have a charitable residual grant program, which anyone who passes away, we have a um, we have a grant program that we provide. Next slide, please. And I was going to mention to Katie too that this program itself would probably be a good webinar to have our Jen Storier, who does the charitable grant program. It is a wonderful program that's available to anyone in the state of Pennsylvania with a disability where they don't have funds from other sources, and it can pay for yearly camps and recreation, medical equipment, home and vehicle adaptations, recreational activities not covered by and again, we have an online application process, but you can also call Jen. There's applications are reviewed quarterly. I mean, we have given over the years over close to $8 million in this program, and we send kids to camp all the time. I mean, it's a wonderful program. So I would really, encourage you to contact Jen, or maybe Katie, as I say, we can talk about having Jen come out and talk to your families specifically about the program. Because there's a couple programs actually that she does. There's also a loan program so anyways, it might be another good webinar for your families. Next slide. But that's how we use our funds. Anything left in the pooled trust. Again, the myth is, again, to establish a special needs trust. I mentioned earlier that we will start a trust for as low as $500. And again, we also reinforce about, going to an attorney who knows what they're doing when they're drafting this special needs trust. Once again, I'd encourage you to call us. If you're looking for an attorney and you need some guidance in that area. I also would tell you, and Katie mentioned this earlier, we've been working with the Financial Empowerment Center and doing some of these presentations and partnering with them, because a number of families will tell us, it's all well and good to talk about future financial planning, but I'm worried about putting food on the table tomorrow, and how can you help me to, what can I do to save and become more financially stable? And the Financial Empowerment Center does do a wonderful job of working with you individually to see your circumstance. How can they help you to, pay off some of your debts, learn, have a savings, increase your credit score. Think about, all the options that are to help you with financial empowerment. And that is important. We do understand that, because again, it can be quite daunting to think about, how to plan for the future. Next slide. So the ABLE Act, a lot of people I know in your questions want to know more about the ABLE Act. And it was signed into law in 2014 by President Obama. And it is actually a new provision under the IRS code 529. And it is much like a 529, but it actually allows for people with disabilities, and again, it's people that were disabled before the age of 26, to save in an account. I think it's called a 529A, and it is any money that is placed in that account does not count against you for your benefits. And you'll see I did include, again, the 800 number to call in addition to their website. And they are wonderful in terms of helping to, helping to walk you through it. You want to go to the next slide? So the beneficiary in this situation, the beneficiary is the account owner, but the authorized signers can be added to the account, like a parent could be added to the account. Once again, the person has to be disabled before the age of 26. They are trying to raise that age limit, but it's still 26 at the moment. Um, by the way, I should mention, every state has their own, well, most states have their own programs, or if they don't have their own, they do it in collaboration with another state. But the whole idea was that it's state by state, and it's usually through their treasury departments. Pennsylvania, it's the Department of Treasury. So when you sign up for ABLE, you're signing up for PA ABLE. And there's lots of, that's another thing, and a lot of questions about what if they move out of state. And again, if you call and talk to them, there's a lot more to know about the ABLE accounts. But right now, the limit, though, is from all sources each year, no more than $16,000 per year can be added from all sources. And also, there is a provision if the individual with a disability is working, they're able to add an additional $12,490 from their work income additionally to that amount, but only if it's work income can they add. But each year a person could be putting up to $16,000 a year into their ABLE account, and SSI recipients can save up to $100,000 without SSI being affected. Now, usually what happens is they'll suspend SSI until you get your balance under $100,000. But generally, you don't lose your MA. It's just the SSI. The 529 amounts for just a normal. If you just had a normal 529, it's a little over 500,000, and that actually applies to the ABLE accounts too. So you could accumulate that amount, again, assuming you're not on SSI. In the state of Pennsylvania, so far, and we'll see how long this goes, because the federal law talks about payback to the state. But the state of Pennsylvania chose to waive payback, and in fact, in the state of Pennsylvania, remainder funds can be transferred to a disabled sibling or to the beneficiary's estate. So it doesn't go back to the state to pay for medical assistance. But the funds in the ABLE account, we like it because there's lots of flexibility to use it. I mean, it talks about educational expenses, but it can also be used for transportation, housing, other disability related, benefits. And so far, I mean, we always tell families with the ABLE accounts, it's important to kind of keep track of how you're using it. And also, it's probably best to have receipts or something that demonstrates how the funds were used. It always, is subject to some audit. We just don't know. No one that we know, they have not audited ABLE accounts, but you just don't know. It's important to just keep track of how you're using the account. But it is a wonderful option, and we encourage people to use it. You can start one for as low as $2,500. I'm sorry, $25, and there are a number of different investment options that you can use, including just having a regular checking account where you have a debit card to use it. So it depends on the needs of the person. So again, it's a good thing, a good option. Next. So I should tell you, so future planning activities. These are some resources for all of you to know about. We do a monthly newsletter that it's called Trust Matters, and we update everyone on the latest, changes in government benefits, the laws, legal changes, disability related information. And anyone can sign up for the newsletter. You just have to email. You can email me, or at the end of the slides there'll be my colleague Patty Urena. Either of us, send us your email address and we'll add you, because that's where you'll get information, because we do a speaker series. The speaker series usually goes from the fall to the spring, and we're in the process. We have two that we're going to be offering in March, and I'll get the dates to Katie, but one is on supported decision making, and the other is on Medicare and dual eligibility. So we do lots of speaker series. This year, we're also going to be doing a second annual conference on future planning in the fall. So you'll know about that if you're as part of our newsletter. In the past, we've done a lot of presentations and vendor fairs in person. As you can tell, most of what we do now is virtual. And also the free legal clinics. We will, once we can get back in person, we do provide free legal clinics for families to come in and have a free consultation with a lawyer about your situation and some guidance. By the way, we always say we do not do the legal work that a family might need. We do have two attorneys on staff, and we can review your documents and, just give you some peace of mind that they're drafted properly. But we do not actually, draft the wills or the special needs trust. That's why we give the list out of people that know this area. And finally, the free personal planning guide. As I say, we're working on it now because it's 110 pages, so there's a lot of sections to it, and we're trying to streamline it and make it available online. So the future planning activities are they're resources for families, and we want you to know about them. And if you need us, go to the next slide. We're going to do questions, but then the next slide is contact information. Both myself and Patty Arena, who wasn't able to be with us tonight, but those are our contacts. And anything that you have questions about or we can help you with, provide guidance, we're happy to do it, because that's why we're there. I mean, that's our reason to be. So questions. We have some in the chat.
Yeah, I'm going to stop our share so I can pull up our chat here.
Yes, very good.
So one question, do you know of lawyers that will sue Social Security after they've been denied?
Oh yeah, well there's a number of attorneys that specialize in that area, Social Security disability benefits, and we work with them. So I mean, again, if you want to email me, we can give you a few names of attorneys that we've worked with that specialize, and those are the disability lawyers, the people that do disability applications all the time and that are helping people who are denied. And you've probably seen some of their advertisements on TV, but we have a few that we work with that we can tell you about. Yeah, you're gonna get the slideshow. Okay. Okay. Good question about, does a third-party trust need to be established before the death of the parent with a will, or can be established prior to the distribution of assets? It has to be done while the parent's living, because once you pass, then if you haven't established a special needs trust, then the assets are going to go directly to your family member. So it has to be done while you're living. And by the way, because it's done, it's like your will, you can change it. You would review it and you can change it, and at any time before you pass. Once you pass, the trust is established and hopefully funded at that time.
Can I ask a follow-up question about that?
Yeah.
So my mother's will did say that my sister's portion should be distributed to a special needs trust that was going to be, I don't know, the guarantors or whatever, the trustees would be her sisters, but there was no trust. So you're saying, I'm understanding correctly, that like the third party trust is not an option any longer then? Like it said so in the will, but no trust was ever established.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So there was no, I mean, there should have been a trust document somewhere that, because yeah. I would talk to the attorney is this fairly recent that this happened? Or has
The
it been?
death happened within a year.
Yeah. I will go back and talk to the attorney about that provision of her will and ask him about that, just to make sure, because if she's referring to a special needs trust, I'm wondering if there was a document that was created. It's probably worth asking about.
Yeah, I was created in the 80s, so I don't know.
Okay.
I don't want to derail. I
Okay.
think I can always reach out as well.
And yeah, and please do, because maybe our trust attorney can better answer that question, just to see what could be done. Okay, let's see, where are we? Let's see, do you know if we can start an ABLE account while still awaiting SSI determination? I didn't mention this, but yes, you can. You don't have to be on Social Security or SSI to establish an ABLE account. You just have to certify that you're disabled, and that could be your doctor saying, if it's ever a question, to say that you have a disability. So you don't have to be on benefits. You can establish that ABLE account while you're waiting, especially if you have assets that you would like to shelter to qualify for SSI. So yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that. That's a good question. Let's see, where are we? Let's see. Okay. All right. Do you know if we can start? Yeah, I think that was pretty much what was in the chat. And then I was just looking over again, some of the questions that came up. I think I've answered most of the questions. One thing that, as far as the difference between the ABLE and the pooled trust, just to mention that very briefly, keep in mind if someone comes into money and let's say it's above that $16,000 limit and they need to shelter that, they may need to use a pooled trust because the reality is that's the maximum that they can put in it. So a pooled trust might, in that case, be utilized. And keep in mind, because the pooled trust doesn't have any upper limits, and you can contribute, so there are certain circumstances where a pooled trust might make sense to use instead of the ABLE account. Um, let's see. Yeah, I'm just looking to see, once again, as far as resources available, that's what we're all about. And, really trying to make sure people have the information they need to do proper planning. So I think that's about it. Anything
How
else?
could I set up an appointment with you?
I'm sorry?
I wanted to set up an appointment with you to talk about an ABLE account. Could I do that?
Of course, yeah. As I say, just if you can call my office and leave a message, and I will get back to you. And happy to
The
discuss.
number you put in the slide?
Yeah, the follow-up email that goes out later this week will have the slides. So all of the contact numbers that are on those you'll have access to. It will also have the recording so you can hear the audio that was shared. And then we'll make sure someone else left a comment if there can be links to those previous webinars that you have archived at the Family Trust. So we'll make sure all those resources are included and everyone knows how to get any appointments set up or know who to ask questions to them.
Yeah, be
Cool.
happy to do it. Okay. Well, thanks. I went over my time as usual. I mean,
Okay.
there's always so much to cover, but I hope this was helpful. And as I say, anything we can do to help you, that's why we're there. And just glad to be here. So
Yeah, well, thank you for coming and presenting. Like I said, that email will be going out. It will also have the link to the survey to let us know what you thought about the presentation. And there's always a place in there that you can suggest future topics. If there is another financial item that you're wondering about, we can always look if we can find a speaker for you. And if you provide contact information when you answer that, you'll be entered to win a $50 Walmart gift card. So if there aren't any other questions, we will wrap up and close down our recording. But